So my passion is connection, infinite connections. And to me, infinite connections is about our connection with the divine. It's also about our connection with that divine presence within each other. And it's infinite in its ability to express. One of my favorite books is by Lynne Mctaggart. She wrote a book called The Bond, and it's about sort of the science of connection. And in this book, she shares a study. This is a study that was done back in 1930. Arlie Bach was the head researcher on this project. And what he did was he went to Harvard University, and he did a study of 268 men, hand-selected, because they thought these men were sort of on track to have happy lives, success, and they were defining success as happiness. And so they hand-selected these 268 men, and the plan was to follow them for 70 years with a team of psychiatrists and psychologists and checking their health, checking their vitals, all these different things that they were tracking for this group of men. Some of them, one of them, was JFK. I mean, many of them went on to do very great things, and they were chosen because they were expected to go forth based on their past and where they'd come from and their disposition, their personalities. They thought that this was going to be a really great focus group. And what happened was in 1967, there was a new researcher who took over the study. His name was George Vaillant. And so by the time he got into the study, these men were about 50 years old, over 50 years old. And what he expected to find when he took over the study was 268 success stories. But that's not what he found. What he found was that a third of these men were diagnosed with some kind of clinical mental illness or clinical depression, something. They weren't living the ideal happy lives that they had expected. Many of them were alcoholics, had addiction issues. And what's interesting is at the same time, there was another study being done in Boston. The study in Boston was done with young men at the time who were going to be studied for 70 years. These men came from poor immigrant families, and they weren't expected to be these great success stories. But the interesting thing was, at the end of the 70 years, the results were pretty much the same. So all the things that they thought would create a happy, successful life, they found that it maybe wasn't the case. They found that money and good upbringing, they thought that'd be a factor, wasn't a factor. Luck wasn't a factor. Personality traits didn't seem to be a factor one way or the other. So what is the secret? What did they find? I brought you a clue to see what was the secret they found that these successful, happy men had in common. So here is a little illusion to give you a little hint. Have you seen this before? How many of you look at this and you see two faces? Yes? How many of you see a vase? Raise your hand if you see both. You see them both? Depends on how you look at it, doesn't it? Yeah, it's about perception. So sometimes we see faces. There's me and there's you. And that's what is, right? That's what's real. But there's also this something that lives in the space between us. And it's real also. There's a quantum physicist named Werner Heisenberg, and he's known for this principle called uncertainty principle. Uncertainty principle says there's no such thing as a thing. If you really boil it down into what we're made of, on a molecular level, it's like the things aren't real. What's real is the space between the things. So the thing is not the thing. The real thing is the thing between the things. Got that? Quantum physics, fascinating. So, it's easy to talk about you and me as separate things, but really, there's this something that lives in the space between us. And quantum physics would say that's what's real. What's real is what lives in the space between us. So Jesus said it like this. He said, in this world, there is persecution. So when you go through this world, you're going to feel like there's someone out there, and we go head to head with people. In this world, there is persecution. And he said, but take courage, be brave, for I have conquered the world. And I think what he kind of meant by this is, in this world, we have this perception that it's me and it's you, and I've got to get my way, and you're trying to get your way. And he's saying, I've overcome that. It's as if he could live in the space between. He could sculpt what was existing as true reality in the space between the things. When I first started the church in Wimberley, Unity of Wimberley, I was going through all these classes at Unity Village, doing the whole licensed teacher thing. And every time I'd go into the classes, my teachers, I had this big inquiry. I said, our message is so much about personal responsibility. It's about meditation and prayer and that God is within and that I control my mind and my thoughts and therefore my reality. It's all very individualized. So I went in there and I kept asking them, so why do we do church? Yeah, it's like, so I'm getting trained to lead a church when all of our message is about it's all within me. Couldn't I just stay home and do that? Wouldn't that be easier? And so they answered my questions. I never liked their answers. I don't even remember what they said because it just never resonated with me. There's got to be something else. There's got to be another reason why we come together. And what I realize now is that the spiritual journey, if it's just about us, it's incomplete. That where we create, it requires relationship. Because what's real is not me or you. What's real is what's in the space between us. And that space doesn't exist if we're in isolation. That space only exists when we immerse ourselves into communities like this. That's why it's so important. So I love Abraham Hicks. I love Esther Hicks. I was reading the book, Getting Into the Vortex. Fantastic book. And one of the things that she says in there is, without others, you could not be you. Right? Without you here, I would not be here speaking. Without you here, Natalie would not be singing. She wouldn't have an audience. Without a patient, there can't be a doctor. Without a student, there can't be a teacher. That everything exists in relationship, and it is the relationship that ties everything together. And the interesting thing is, the science of it, it actually begins at birth. Did you know the very first impulse of the human brain is to bond with the brain waves of the mother? So when a baby is born, the brain, the prefrontal cortex, or whatever you call these, this frontal lobe, it'll sync up. The baby will sync up with the mother's brain. It's called entrainment. And when the mother's feeling good, the baby's feeling good. When the mother's off, the mother gets off. You ever noticed that when the baby and the mother separate, it creates a discordance? And then when they come back together, that discordance gets resolved. So I used to think that I was terrible with babies because every time a mother would hand over a baby to me, the baby would be like, ah! And I thought, oh, I'm terrible with kids. And I was so terrified when I had my own daughter. I'm like, I'm not good with babies. I don't know how I'm going to do this thing. And then my daughter was born, and it's like, ooh, she likes me. And if anything was wrong with her, I'm like, oh, just give her to me. Just give her to me. And there's actual science behind that there is something that happens when a mother and child are together. Their brains are all synced up. And so it feels good for that child to be connected with the mother. It's biological. So here's another illusion to sort of give you a different perspective of this. Look at this one. Do you see it? There's the things, and then there's what lives in the space between the things. And then that's truly, what if that's actually what's real? So Esther Hicks has some meditations. In this book, Getting Into the Vortex, there's a meditation CD, and there's a whole section on relationships. So I was listening to it, and as I was listening to it, I pulled out a few points that really struck home for me, and I unitized it a bit. I turned it into affirmations. So here's a few points to ponder in terms of how we relate to one another. So I'll say this as an affirmation. I'll say it. You can spit it right back to me. So here we go. Ready? This is going to be fun. You excited? Relationships. Juicy stuff. Okay, so here we go. Sometimes it seems like other people have the power to negatively impact my experience. But that is never true. You can shake your finger when you say that if you want, but that is never true. So I'm going to take a deep breath in, breathe it in. So I'm going to read through the whole thing so you can really soak it up. Sometimes it seems like other people have the power to negatively impact my experience, but that is never true. And I know this is a fact because I had a dog once named Bella. Bella was a crazy puppy. got into everything. And I wanted to train this dog. My husband, he's like dog trainer. We're like, we're going to train this dog. We're going to train this dog to be a good dog. So Bella would get in there, and she would chew up the furniture, like totally destroy the dining table. And so we'd think, okay, we are going to negatively impact this dog's experience to train it not to chew up the furniture. So it's like, okay, dog, no more access to the house. You are now banished to the backyard. And the dog says, yes. I love the backyard. Dig, 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 dig. Dug up everything in the backyard. I come home, I'm like, I am going to negatively impact your experience. So now, no more backyard for you. Now, I'm like, I'm gonna put you in the bathroom where you can't get in any trouble. And the dog goes, yes. There's things to explore in there. So the dog goes into the bathroom for the day. I come back, ate a bar of soap. Should have seen, got into the trash. You should have seen that bathroom. So I'm like, okay, how can I negatively impact this dog's experience? I'm going to give it the disapproving face. I'm going to ignore you and give you disapproving face. And the dog's like, great, I was needing a nap. Let me know when you're over it, and I'll just be happy when you're good. So that dog is now my mentor, my role model for how to not let anything or anyone negatively impact my experience. And if you really want to annoy those who are trying to persecute you, this is the one to remember. Nothing, no one can negatively impact our experience without our permission. So that's point number one. Now here's the second one. You ready for this one? Repeat after me. Sometimes others believe that their happiness depends on my response to them. But that is never true. Take a deep breath in, breathe that in. Sometimes others believe that their happiness depends on my response to them. But that is never true. And I know when my daughter was little, it sure seemed true. If she was upset, I could hold her and she'd be fine. So it was like her experience depended on me to do something. And I wondered when that would end. And it doesn't. Still, when she scrapes her knee, I want to be there. Like I need to do something. But the truth is, it's not up to us. It's not up to me to make you happy. It's not up to you to make someone else happy. That everyone has responsibility for how they're doing and how they're feeling. I love the story of Jesus with the woman who is hemorrhaging, and she reaches out and is like, if I only touch the hem of your garment, I'll be healed. And so she does, and she's healed. And Jesus says, who was that? And he wanted her to know, daughter, your faith has made you well. You thought it was me, but it was what you put in the space between us that healed you. It was that faith. It was that expectation. Your faith has made you well. It was the relationship that you brought into this experience that healed you. Your faith has made you well. So that's the second point to ponder. So here's number 3. You ready? When others lash out at me in anger, with words or actions, their battle is not with me, but with themselves. Take a deep breath in. When others lash out at me in anger with words or actions, their battle is not with me, it's with themselves, which is easier said than done, because we get triggered. Someone comes after us, we want to go after them. We want to retaliate. Someone hurts us, we want to hurt them back. We get plugged in, thinking it's about you and me, and off we go. There's a story I read about a woman whose son was killed by a young man, and at the trial, she stood up in the courtroom as that young man was getting sentenced, and she looked him in the eye and she said, I will kill you. You killed my son, I will kill you. A few months later, she goes and she visits him in prison. She's his first visitor. A few months later, she goes again, she brings little gifts, cigarettes, things to read, things like that. When he finally gets released from prison, she makes sure he has a job. And then she realizes to get on his feet, he's going to need a place to live. So she said, if you want a place to stay for a couple weeks while you get on your feet, you can live with me. 8 months later, he's still living with her. She invites him into the living room, sits him down, and says, "Do you remember that day? Remember that day in the courtyard, in the courtroom, when I said that I will kill you?" She said, "I want you to know the boy that killed my son is dead to me. I killed you. That boy is dead, my son is dead, and what's left is you. And I'd like to adopt you to be my son, if you're willing." And she adopted him. Instead of putting resentment, fear, anger into the space between, what if we put love? What if we put compassion? What if we put forgiveness into that space? How could that change the world? That's what we're here to do. So take a deep breath in. Here's bottom line, grand finale affirmation. Repeat after me. When I release all concern about how others feel about me and focus only on how I feel about them, I will understand who I really am, and I will discover what true freedom really is. Take a deep breath in, breathe that one in. When I release all concern about how others feel about me and focus only on how I feel about them, I will understand who I really am, and I will discover what true freedom really is. It's not about me and you as these two separate things. It's about what we create together, what we put into the space between us. So if you think back to this Harvard study, 268 men, the Boston study, all these young boys, the things that they found, the thread that they found for those who went on to have happy, successful lives. Any guesses? All of you 9 a.m. people know. Altruism. Altruism. Those who consciously sought out a way to serve, those who went out into their communities, into the world, putting love into the space between them and the world, compassion, service. The result was they were happy. You know, that's what we're here to do, is to be proactive in our connections with each other, to be proactive in putting love out there in the spaces between us, in the spaces where maybe love seems to be missing. So there was a man named Lawrence Anthony. He was known as the elephant whisperer. He loved elephants. And he lived in Africa. He bought this 5,000-acre elephant preserve. And not long after he got this preserve, he got a call from someone saying, "Hey, we've got this herd of elephants, wild elephants, and they're out of control. If you can't save them, we're going to have to kill them all because they're just destroying towns, they're destroying everything." And so he got this herd, he brought them into his sanctuary. They immediately broke down his electric fence and escaped. Herded them up again. They came back, they escaped again. They escaped again. Finally, he brings them back and he realizes these crazy wild elephants are the way they are because of all their negative experiences with human beings. You know, they'd been hunted and tortured and all these crazy things. And so he had this moment where this matriarchal elephant, the one who usually was the one busting down the fence, comes back to the fence and is looking him in the eye. She's just about to ram into that fence again. And he's looking at her from the other side, knowing that once she's over there, you know, she could trample him easy. He looks her in the eye, and he realizes he's got to do something different. So he talks to her. He says, "I'm here to help you. You need to stay with me because here you're safe. You're safe here." And he had this conversation with her. "I'm here to help you. You're safe here. Stay here." And she looks him in the eye, and there's this moment where she sticks her trunk through that fence line so that he can connect with her. And from that moment on, the herd stayed within the boundaries of that preserve. And amazing things started to happen. When this matriarch had a new little baby elephant, she would take the baby to Lawrence, like, "Look, here's my new baby." And when he had a grandchild, he brought that grandchild back to the herd and said, "Look, Here's my new grandchild. They shared these amazing moments together. It was, this relationship that was loving and protective. And when Lawrence Anthony died, an amazing thing happened. He had moved his home a couple miles from the preserve because it was safer for the elephants, because people wouldn't know exactly where they were, and it made it safer for them. So he died in his home, and a couple days after he died, the family looked out and took this picture. There was a processional of elephant herds, 2 of them, traveling more than 10 hours in single file to come to the place where the family was. They stayed for 2 days during the funeral, and then they returned single file, processional, back to where they lived. How could they know? Perhaps they could see what's in the space between us. Perhaps they knew that it's not about me and you. Perhaps those animals could feel something that sometimes we, in our busyness, don't feel, don't see, is that there is something between us and it is real. So take a moment, bring to mind any person, any situation where you feel like what you've been putting into the space is maybe not what you intend to put into the space. If you've got relationships where you feel like there's anger there, or there's frustration there, or there's resentment there, or there's fear there, or whatever that might be, if you can identify one relationship, and choose something different, what would it be like to bring something different into that space? And so with that person in mind, affirm with me, I bring love to the space between us. I bring love to the space between us. I bring compassion to the space between us. And compassion to the space between us. I bring forgiveness to the space between us. I bring forgiveness to the space between us. I bring appreciation to the space between us. Appreciation to the space between us. Take a deep breath in. And so it is. And so we return home. Amen. Thank you so much. Blessings.